A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm. Thank you. So, hello, good morning to all of you, and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of geography. Now, today we shall be initiating the discussion of the portion of coral reefs, and then we shall be moving ahead into the portion of Indian geography. Now, as yesterday also we have had the conversation that when we talk about coral reefs, that is a topic that you largely cover in the area of environment ecology in terms of its biotic factors. Now, here we are going to cover the geographical aspect of the coral reefs, that where they will be found. So, here for the examination, it will be important for you to know about fringing reefs, then barrier reefs, and also atolls, what they are and their formation, geographical presence, and formation. So here, when you talk about corals or when you think about corals, the first image that comes to your mind is that of a kind of a unique habitat or an ecosystem where you have wide variety of different types of colors which are apparent. For example, if you take a look at this, this is the image of the coral reef. Now, coral reef. So, reef is basically a combination of hundreds and thousands of individual corals. Now, these corals, these numerous different hues of colors that you observe, all of these are corals. So, reefs are made up of these hundreds and thousands of individual coral polyps. So, first things first, are these coral polyps animals or plant species? So, first things, these are basically animal species. Corals are animals. Animal species. Now, these reefs are made up of hundreds and thousands of these individual coral polyps, which come together to form that reef. So, how do they come together? So, basically, these corals, they have the unique ability to synthesize calcium and carbonate ions which are present in the water around them, and to convert that calcium and carbonate ions into calcium carbonate, which forms a kind of a solid structure. Okay, so these corals, they synthesize calcium and carbonate ions to form a hard calcium carbonate exoskeleton and build large stony reefs. So that is the case of the occurrence of a coral reef. Now here, when we say that corals are animal species with a calcium carbonate exoskeleton, calcium carbonate is whitish in coloration, dull white. You would have seen that in the case of the cements also, where calcium carbonate is an important ingredient. Now, how is it that these corals have these unique coloration and these different hues and patterns associated? So, that is basically because when we talk about these corals, these are always in a symbiotic relationship. Most of them, they are in a symbiotic relationship with the algae that they find. You have a species of algae that is what is known as zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae. Now, this is the species of algae which exists in a mutually beneficial relationship or a symbiotic relation with the corals. So, it is the pigments of these algae and these algal species which provide that unique coloration pattern that you observe in the corals. Now, these algal species, why do they live with the corals? That is because if you want to understand the basic morphology of the corals, this is the basic body morphology of the corals, which is very simple body structure. They are fixated to the ground surface. They cannot, these are the ones which cannot move, so they are fixated to the ground surface. And in order to trap food, they have got some amount of tentacles. So any floating object moving in the ocean water carried by the ocean currents and the waves, that any floating organic matter is trapped by the tentacles and is ingested. Having said that, for an organism which is fixed to the ground, you can always think that the supply of food is always going to be deficient because this organism cannot go to different places in order to fetch for food. So there can be deficiency in availability of food, and most of the times there is deficiency for the availability of food. That is where some of these corals, they enter into the symbiotic relationship. Symbiotic relationship is where a kind of a relationship where both the organisms benefit out of it. So here you will find that on these tentacles you have these small pigments, and these pigments are basically your zooxanthellae. So what do the corals gain out of this relationship, and what do the zooxanthellae gain out of this relationship? So basically, when the zooxanthellae, they enter into that symbiotically beneficial relationship, here the zooxanthellae, they get a platform on which they can grow, and thereby they can synthesize the food by carrying out photosynthesis. And also the corals, they provide them some nutrients, calcium, etc. These are the nutrients which the corals consistently keep on providing. So like that, you will observe that zooxanthellae, they get a platform and some amount of nutrients. Whereas when these zooxanthellae, they carry out the process of photosynthesis, they manufacture food. And that food is used by the corals and the coral ecosystem. So here, in this relationship, zooxanthellae carries out the process of photosynthesis and thereby is able to produce food that is used by the corals. Now, not all the corals, they enter into this kind of a relationship. You have variety of different corals, just like any animal species that you observe. It has got a large amount of genetic variety. For example, snakes. Now, when you think about the animal species of snakes, now these snakes, it is not as if all the snakes will be of the same variety. You have the rat snake, you have the cobra, you have the rattlesnake, you have the mambas, you have boa constrictor, various different varieties of snakes. Similarly, in the case of the corals also, you have a broader classification into warm water corals, warm water corals, and cold water corals. Now, when we talk about the warm water corals, these are the ones which predominate. Now, these are the ones which will be found closer to the surface. These are the ones where you will find that the zooxanthellae is in a mutually beneficial relationship or a symbiotic relationship. And it is these corals which provide you with various different hues of coloration and the various different types of appearances that you observe. When we talk about cold water corals, these can live at the ocean bottom where sunlight doesn't reach that frequently, right? Or these can be found in very cold areas. So these cold water corals do not have zooxanthellae population. Warm water corals, they have zooxanthellae. They have the presence of zooxanthellae. It is an algae. Zooxanthellae are basically algal species. So basically, these corals, now when they are present with the zooxanthellae, now we are going to concentrate on warm water corals here, because cold water corals, they will be found sometimes at the marine bottoms, and not much is known about them till now. You still have some cold water corals which in large amount they are found in the region around Norway. For example, Rost Reef in Norway is an example of the large colony of cold water coral. So example, one of them is black coral, found on the base of the ocean floor. Then another example you can take of Rost Reef near Norway, which is a cold water coral. But majority of the coral species that you come across the entirety of the world, you'll find that they are dominated by the warm water corals. That is the one which provides that unique coloration pattern. So this zooxanthellae, which is an algae, it is an algal species. It carries out the process of photosynthesis. Now, when it carries out the process of photosynthesis, produces food and oxygen. Now, this production of food and oxygen, which is done by the corals, that is very, very beneficial for the marine environment, because the marine ecosystem also requires dissolved oxygen in huge quantity, because all the species of fishes, etc., they will also carry out respiration. For that respiration, they need the dissolved oxygen in water. I hope we are aware of that. So that is why these particular kind of corals, when they are present, they enormously end up adding oxygen into the water, which is very beneficial for the marine species. Secondly, the unique kind of habitats that they represent, along with the huge amount of production of food, that serves as a kind of a shelter or as a kind of a provisor which can support various different types of species. Huge variety of biodiversity is to be found in these areas of coral reefs. That is why corals are also known as the underwater rainforest. Okay, just like the rainforest across on the land areas, they serve a particular purpose. The corals, they are deemed to have been serving the similar kind of purpose. So that is why also regarded as the underwater rainforest. Underwater rainforest. Why? Because of two reasons. First reason, provide enough oxygen and take in CO2, which the rainforests also do on the land areas. That is why the rainforests on the land, they are also known as the lungs of the planet, because they will take in that carbon dioxide and they will produce oxygen continuously, thereby enriching the global environment with oxygen. And secondly, provide shelter to the biodiversity. Okay, so that is why these corals, they are regarded as the kind of providing the same kind of services which the rainforest provides to the ecosystem above the land areas. They are much more important underwater, because underwater you have to, the species have to be dependent on these particular photosynthesis generating algae, whereby they can get that regular supply of oxygen, and the marine plants, etc., they become the regular supplier of oxygen. Okay. Now here the question is that this symbiotic relationship is obligatory or facultative. So basically, for the warm water corals, it becomes obligatory because of the makeup of their body structure. For the cold water corals, they don't enter into a symbiotic relationship. And uh, as shown in the picture where the zooxanthellae stays in coral reefs. So this unique coloration that you see, corals are stony white. I hope we have seen the corals. This is the coloration of the corals. This is the natural coloration of the corals. The whitish structure that you see. This coloration that you observe is when you have the algal species basically present on the zooxanthellae. Okay, and this is the natural appearance of the zooxanthellae. So or natural appearance of the coral. So corals will always appear to be stony white because they have a calcium carbonate exoskeleton. So these animal species with a calcium carbonate exoskeleton, they will always be very whitish. These will, if you go to Andaman, Nicobar, etc., when they take you to the various different spots of diving, etc., they will give you that particular stony white coral as a kind of a memento, if you want. So there, you observe that the corals are always going to be stony white, skeletal appearance. But it is the zooxanthellae which provides them with the unique coloration. So, a coral reef is an underwater ecosystem characterized by reef building corals. Now, reefs are formed of colonies of coral polyps held together by calcium carbonate. Most coral reefs are built from stony corals whose polyps cluster in groups of hundreds and thousands. Amongst the coral reefs, the warm water corals, the largest coral reef is the Great Barrier Reef, which is found in the northeastern portion of Australia. Northeastern coastline of Australia, where you have the coral sea as well. That is where you find the Great Barrier Reef, which spans for close to around 2,600 kilometers. It can be viewed even from outer space. Now, these corals, as I told you, they are broadly classified into two types. Now, the ones which we talk about, which don't enter into a symbiotic relationship, that is the cold water corals, they there is not significant research till now. It is suspected that many of them might have chemotroph and a kind of because these are the algal species of zooxanthellae, they carry out photosynthesis and thereby they produce food. So they utilize sunlight in order to carry out photosynthesis. But you also have chemotrophic microbes. Chemotrophic means they utilize the chemicals around them to produce food. So it is suspected that few of them, they enter into these chemotrophic microbes and a relationship with the chemotrophic microbes. And but most of the times, it is suspected that their body morphology in itself is such that they don't have that great a requirement of food. So, or that frequent requirement of food. That is why they can survive even without the presence of that symbiotic relationship at the bottom of the ocean floor. Now, for these warm water corals, what is the condition required? Conditions required. So, first things first, clear saline water. Secondly, means they are marine animals basically, hence, as corals are marine animals. Okay. Secondly, they will require availability of sunlight. Why? Because only when sunlight is available will the zooxanthellae be able to carry out photosynthesis. Otherwise, they won't be able to carry out photosynthesis. So, for zooxanthellae, to carry out photosynthesis. Now, what is the consequence of this? Availability of sunlight is required. So they will always be found in shallower waters. In deeper waters where the aphotic zone exists, these corals won't be found. So always found in the shallow waters and the photic zone. So generally in the region around continental shelf. Always found in shallow waters around continental shelf. Then after that, maintenance of temperature. Temperature should be maintained around 24-25 degrees Celsius. That should be the temperature maintained, because any marine species that you take, you will study about it in greater detail in the portion of environment ecology. Any of the marine species that you consider, they will have a very limited thermal tolerance. Marine organisms, they don't have a great thermal tolerance. Like the terrestrial organisms, they have a significant thermal tolerance. For example, any animal that you see, most of them, they will be able to survive in the summer also, the winter also. And there can be a difference of temperature of 10-20 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius, but still they survive. That is how they have evolved. But in the marine species, regardless of any organism that you consider, they have a very limited window of thermal tolerance. They cannot end up tolerating a condition whereby the temperature varies suddenly. Can you think about a reason why? Why is it that marine organisms have a very limited thermal tolerance? They cannot tolerate sudden fluctuations in temperature. Can we think about it? Bhimare, are they bite or harm humans? Okay. So, how many of us have no clue what the corals are and have heard about the corals for the first time? Okay. No homeostasis and cold blooded. Obviously, they are not, no, they don't have homeostasis. But why is it that they don't have homeostasis? That is the question that I am getting at. Why is it that they marine species they don't indicate homeostasis? because they Akash, very good. Why it is only found in water? Why are whales only found in water? We all love whales. Why can't we keep a whale in our Bhopal Zoo where everybody can come and visit them also? Because they are marine species. Why are dolphins found only in water? We can survive on land. So who are they? Are they some kind of a special cabinet minister that they cannot survive where we can survive? Because they are marine species. Similarly, why corals will survive or why corals are found in the marine environment? Because they are marine species. Please don't compare it to yourself that I can survive above land. Why can't the coral survive above land? Who are they? So, marine species, they will survive only in water. Fresh water is not required for the corals. No. Yes, Anjan, correct. Basically, understand. A couple of you have given the correct answer. Deepika, you have also given the correct answer. When we talk about the corals or any kind of marine species, they have evolved as per the marine environment. And in history, you will observe geological history of the planet. While the temperature on the land has observed fluctuations to the great degrees and significant amount of fluctuations to be observed. When we talk about the marine areas, marine areas have had a consistency of temperature. They maintain the temperature because water gains heat very slowly, loses heat very slowly. So historically, they have evolved in an environment where the temperature has largely been consistent. That is why that evolution has led them to a scenario where even today they are very sensitive to any kind of change, right? Whenever there is a temperature departure from normal by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, which is also regarded as a marine heat wave, that immediately can kill a lot of these corals. Okay, so that is the case even for example any species of the marine ecosystem or the marine biome that you consider. All of them, they are very, very sensitive to the case of external temperature. They lack that thermoregulation, the ability to maintain that inner temperature, and that is a resultant of the process of evolution, as simple as that. Okay, so here the temperature ideally should be around 24 or 23 to 25 degrees Celsius. That should be the ideal temperature which is maintained, which should be maintained. Okay, so clear saline water, lack of pollution. Okay, before moving ahead, the question that you had asked, that can corals bite humans? So please understand, what are these corals? These are your corals. All these are corals. The different colors that you see, that is the zooxanthellae populating the tentacles of these corals. So obviously, these are not the species which are either venomous or they will bite you. These are pretty harmless. They almost resemble that of a plant. They are fixed to the ground. They cannot move. So they are fixed to the ground. But if ever you have basically seen a coral, you have basically touched a coral, it will be pointy because the tentacles, all these, they are a bit pointy. So if you step on them, obviously it will prick in under your feet. So you cannot say that the coral has bit me. You have basically stepped on a coral. So they are pretty harmless and they carry out the production of food. So here they will be basically having a very simple body structure where you will have these tentacles around them, and with the help of these tentacles they will push in the food through the orifice, And this is the entire body structure. In the meanwhile, these corals will synthesize the calcium carbonate and build a kind of a stony, whitish exoskeleton all around them. That is the calcium carbonate exoskeleton which they will build around them. Okay, so that is the case of warm water corals, the conditions required for the warm water corals. Based on these conditions, is it found in river? Can these be found in rivers? You let me know. Look at the conditions that I have written. Can the corals be found in the river? Think about it. So it is very clear cut answer. It cannot be found. Why? Because river water has got fresh water and these require marine saline water. Okay, so I hope we are aware that you have different kind of species which survive in fresh water and very different kind of species which can survive in saline water. Freshwater species, they cannot survive in saline water, and vice versa is also true. If you pick a shark and put it in river Ganga, the shark will die. If you pick a Gangetic dolphin and put it in Bay of Bengal, the dolphin will die. You have different species of marine dolphins and different species of riverine dolphins. Okay, so these are basically your corals are your marine species. Okay, right? Like plants, is it possible to grow these corals in marine through anthropogenic activity process to counter the process of bleaching? Yes. You have the biorock mechanism which is being used, etc. So all these you will study in environment ecology in significant detail. Clear water, what is the meaning of clear in this case? So many of the times you would observe that, let's suppose the water is very turbulent, water has got a lot of motion movement in it, right? Let's suppose there are in the case of, let's suppose you consider the Sundarbans delta. In the Sundarbans delta, one can expect a lot of mud being expelled into the sea, lot of sediments being expelled into the sea by the rivers, the river Brahmaputra and Ganga. These rivers will dump out significant amount of and substantial amount of sediment silt deposits into the Bay of Bengal. So, will the water of Bay of Bengal immediately at the mouth of delta, will that water be clean or clear? No, it will be muddied. Lot of particles will be floating around. Now, what it does, it basically blocks the sunlight. Availability of sunlight is blocked. That is why here, if the availability of sunlight is blocked, in that case, the corals won't be able to manufacture the food, or the zooxanthellae present in the corals won't be able to manufacture the food. That is when they start dying. So that is why clear, clean, saline water or marine environment is required for their growth. I hope you would have seen, or I wish that you would have seen the corals, basically the entire discussion around Maldives and Lakshadweep, that Lakshadweep is good and better than Maldives. What is that debate all about? Is it about some random islands that the world is? Why is the world? Why does the world think about Maldives, Caribbean islands, Mauritius, Seychelles? These are very high or on top the holiday spots. Why do you think so? Is it just because you have some islands and people want to go to the islands? These are coral islands. You would have seen in case you nowadays being on social media in itself can be very toxic. But let's suppose you see the social media posts of your friends who go on various different holidays. You observe that in certain of these beaches, you will have turquoise blue colored water. Water will appear very, very clean, and you are left wondering what happened to the beaches in Goa, Gokarna, Chennai, and Trivandrum. The water there is nowhere that clean, but these people, they are sending pictures from Maldives where the water is almost as if you are drawing a painting. Why is that? Because these are present on the corals. So corals, they have the calcium carbonate exoskeleton, and that entire reef will have that whitish appearance. So when light reflects from that, the water will appear bright blue, very bright blue. So the region of Maldives, for example, they are present or built on ancient corals. Lakshadweep is built on the same ancient corals. Okay. So that is why corals nowadays, at least, it is in a lot of news. In Amazon River, it is found. Is it true? No, it is not true. Okay. Now, how do these corals grow? By the way, some of these corals, they will have a lifespan of close to around even more than 1,000 years. Some of these corals, especially the black corals, they can survive for more than 500 and sometimes even more than 1,000 years. So you can think about how long do they live. Warm water corals, they don't live that long for 1,000 years. Most of the species, they live for a few decades and maybe a couple of centuries. Now, how do they grow? So basically, if let's suppose you have the presence of water here, so these corals would be growing where sunlight is available. Now, as they would be present, they would synthesize the calcium and the carbonate ions present around them, and they would convert that to calcium carbonate exoskeleton, and they would grow on that. Once these coral species die, then the next generation of corals would use this calcium carbonate to grow on top of that. And they would also, over their lifetime, leave a lot of that calcium carbonate exoskeleton. That would then be utilized by the next generation of corals, which would start growing on top of that. And they would also start synthesizing calcium carbonate. And eventually, by the time that they die, they would be leaving that calcium carbonate exoskeleton, which will be utilized by the next generation of corals and so on. Eventually, a situation will come where these particular corals, they will rise above water. Now, once they rise above water, then what will happen? Here, when they rise above water, they die. Okay, as soon as these corals, their height increases above the low tide line, they start to die. Why? Because these are marine species. They cannot survive above water. They require the presence of water ecosystem around them. They cannot survive in open air. So they die. Now, once they die, they leave behind that stony calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate, I hope you have seen that pale white or grayish kind of substance which is used in, let's suppose, joining things together, etc., combining things, putting things together, sticking them together. So that is calcium carbonate. So it is whitish. Now, over a period of time, the sea wave action, the action of weathering, physical weathering, that will end up reducing it to a kind of a white sandy island. That is why the coral islands, generally you will observe the presence of white sand. In the region of the coral islands, you will find the presence of white sand. You will not find the presence of the yellowish sand, silica rich yellowish sand that you observe in the normal beaches. Here you will find whitish sand. Why? Because it is the disintegration of calcium carbonate. Now, such an island appears. So, in the sea, in the ocean, if such an island, small island appears, that will be used. Used by whom? Used by the entire biodiversity. You will immediately have, first of all, the birds, the migratory birds, which fly for very long distances. Now, when they observe any kind of this island, they use that island to take a break. From their long flying hours, they do take a break. And many of the times, these birds, they will bring in small amount of the seeds, the fruits that they are carrying. And as a consequence of that, eventually it will lead to reproductive propagation. Eventually, in this area, you will have or you will observe the growth of various different plant species. This region will be populated by the different plant species. You will have different types of vegetation which will accompany that. So, that is what is observed in the case of these corals or the coral islands. That is how these coral islands, they turn out to be a full-fledged ecosystem of their own. Eventually, if the island is long enough or large enough, it can virtually lead to other species of plants being introduced by these migratory birds. With the help of the seeds that they carry in their beak, they drop that seed somewhere. It can germinate. Not all of them will germinate, but it can germinate. So, if ever you have been to, or if ever you go to, for example, Havelock Islands in the region of Andaman Nicobar, or the region of Lakshadweep, or Maldives, or in the region of Indonesia, Philippines, the entire archipelago, you will find hundreds and thousands of these islands. You will find a lot of these seeds which are dropped by the birds. So these are basically how you have the coral islands in existence. Islands. Example, Lakshadweep. The entire country is knowing about Lakshadweep as it has never known in the past. Nowadays, for the past few days, for the past a couple of weeks, the entire country for the first time, many of them have got to know about Lakshadweep thanks to that boycott Maldives trend, which is growing. It is a different matter altogether that, anyways, you had less than 1% of Indians who would who would basically travel to Maldives, right? Less than 1%. And right now, we have almost 50% of the Indians who are boycotting Maldives, regardless of the fact that they would never go either ways. But right now, everybody is busy boycotting Maldives. So that is thankfully because of that. They know that Lakshadweep is a group of islands. Many of the people didn't even know the various different islands in Lakshadweep. Even today, if you ask all the people who are boycotting Maldives en masse, who are basically saying that go to Lakshadweep, ask them to name four islands of Lakshadweep, immediately they will be flattened and they will be floored, because that is the level of awareness that we have. We have very little amount of awareness about our own islands unless and until we are boycotting something online or social media trends. So that is the case where Lakshadweep, I will not give the example of Maldives because it has become very controversial nowadays, but Lakshadweep is an example of coral islands. Okay. Now, is it the same thing uh, in stalactites and stalagmites? Calcium carbonate is present in both the cases. Exoskeleton means, for example, in our body, we have an epiderm. an outer skin, exoskin. So imagine a structure where there is skeletal presence on the outside. So outside skeleton which is present, that is the exoskeleton. Can we say conch shell is also coral? No. The conch shell is that of a snail, species of snails that you have. So when you remove that species, the soft flesh of that species, you are left with that conch shell. That is also made out of calcium carbonate, very thin layer of calcium carbonate. Can we say corals couldn't be grown in fresh water because of need of calcium carbonate? Yes, you can say so. These form coral islands when the CaCO3 comes above. Yes, that is true. And hashtag boycott Maldives. Okay, so let's keep the emotions under control. All the Lakshadweep islands are coral reefs. They are coral islands. Yes. 8,000 hotel booking cancelled in Malta. Okay, very good. So stop believing in social media, by the way, guys. The bookings have the real impact of that boycott Maldives. The entire thing will be something which will be reflected in the this particular quarter. So all the things that you read on social media, that Maldives is basically now nobody will go to Maldives because we are boycotting Maldives, etc., etc. That is not true. You still have there in these particular months, months of December, January, most of the times it is fully booked. And as I told you, nowadays you will have people who never even have visited abroad. They are also posting online that I had a plan to visit Maldives, but now instead of Maldives, I'll go to Goa instead. It is a different matter. They would go to Goa anyways because I'm boycotting Maldives. So don't believe in that. It will take a hit. The Maldivian tourism industry will take a hit, but please understand it is not that black and white. That today we Indians have said that we won't go to Maldives, we'll go to Lakshadweep, everybody will start going to Lakshadweep. That doesn't happen because if you observe the tourism infrastructure of Maldives, I hope you are aware that Maldives has got direct flight connectivity from Moscow, from Turkey, from Dubai, from Abu Dhabi, Doha, Singapore, many portions of India, Colombo, Australia. So you have direct flights and long haul planes, not the smaller ones. Long haul planes will bring in flight load of tourists to Maldives. And right now, Maldives, many of the islands, I hope you are aware of this, as a political fallout of the geopolitical fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war. So Russia-Ukraine war basically had many of the Russian oligarchs. Russian oligarchs basically the powerful conglomerates, the Russian billionaires, who basically go and buy the football club just for fun on one file. So they are very, very rich oil magnates. Now, many of them found their survivability to be very difficult in the European nations after the Russia-Ukraine war or in the North American nations because of the fear of being arrested by the US authorities. So many of these Russian oligarchs, since or for the past year, they have booked multiple islands in the Maldives. So, anyways, when they go ahead and book the entire island in a particular region, that island doesn't need any tourist anymore. So it is only after COVID where the Indian tourist numbers they started spiking in Maldives. Otherwise, the most contributing country for tourism in Maldives has been China and Russia also. These are the most contributors. So that it will take some hit, maybe sometime ahead into the future, but you don't have an alternative in India. Because when the government brought in a bill a couple of years earlier in order to develop Lakshadweep, and that was a bill to pave way for the development of resorts on the scale of Maldives in Lakshadweep, it was met with such a wide scale and wide level of protest that that particular order could not even see the light of the day. So everybody stood up in arms and protested and at that point of time, the trend just now as it is promote Lakshadweep and boycott Maldives. At that point of time, it was save Maldives, keep infrastructure out, and save Maldives, save Lakshadweep, keep the infrastructure out. Presently, we find ourselves to be woefully short of infrastructure. We don't have an airport, we don't have a hospital. Airport is very temporary. You don't have the airport which is sufficient enough or capable enough to handle the big airplanes, the long haul flights. So tourism sector you cannot generate overnight. So Maldives is still pretty much secure, but then it will take a hit in the long run. So don't get swayed by this so much. And is the spread across the oceans? Absolutely yes. And so it is right that the coral reef won't be seen in estuaries. On the seaward side of the estuaries, you might also find, but on the riverine side of the estuaries, you will not find the presence of the corals. Do you need a visa for Maldives? No. And somebody has done a Google search. Union Territory and is comprised of 12 atolls, 3 reefs, 5 submerged banks, and 10 uninhabited islands. The island comprise of 32. Don't Google search and paste it in the question and answer portion. Okay. So here, that is the case of the coral reefs, and basically how these coral reefs are warm water corals. They are to be found. Now here, this is the distribution of warm water corals across the globe. Now, one thing that we can gain or we can conclude from this is the fact that the corals will always, warm water corals will always grow in shallow waters, where the water is shallow, where the water is not very deep. So, where do you find the conditions where the water is not very deep? In the region around islands, right? Or in the region close to the landmass. Wherever you have a region close to landmass, that means in that area, water won't be very deep. Now, in those areas, in those shallower waters, the corals can grow always, right? Now, you have a particularly distinct area. This is the region which is also known as the coral triangle. This is because of high amount of corals to be found in this area. Almost one third of the global coral distribution for warm water corals is to be found in this area. This is representing a region from Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands. Around this region, you will find one of the highest presence of the corals. Why? Because here you have hundreds and thousands of various islands. So around these regions of the islands, you will have, for example, wherever the land structure is like this, let's suppose there is an island and there is water all around. So here they will be able to find the shallow waters. Here they will grow. Here they will grow. Okay. So that is why around the fringes of the land, you will find a lot of these corals. Now, UPSC had asked this question about multiple times about the corals. It has asked multiple questions in the prelims. One of the questions that it asked was that around the region of India or the coastline of India, where is it that you will not find the presence of corals? And of the various options which was given, one of the option was Sundarbans. Now, in the Sundarban Delta. So always understand wherever fresh water or muddied water, etc., these are being supplied, their corals won't be able to survive. Okay, so at the mouth of the various rivers, in the deltaic region, etc., the corals won't be able to survive. Okay, now Here, basically, now we come to the portion of coral bleaching. What is the bleaching of a coral? So bleaching is a term that you would come across even in your day-to-day lives. Bleaching basically, let's suppose any of your tablecloth gets dirty, muddied, you carry out the bleaching exercise, which is a kind of a whitening process. Things appear to be brighter and whiter at the end of it. Now, when we say coral bleaching, due to adverse conditions of the ecosystem around them, the zooxanthellae population, they start dying. First of all, their productivity declines by around 60 to 90%. And that is when the zooxanthellae either they start to die or they leave this coral. If let's suppose the temperature has increased to around 30 degrees Celsius and it has persisted for that temperature for some time, the zooxanthellae will leave the corals or they will die. If there is oil spill, oil pollution, the zooxanthellae will leave the corals or will die. As a consequence of that, as the zooxanthellae they leave it, what you have is again the stony white coral skeletal appearance. Now, this in its original state, it is unable to manufacture food for itself. It is reliant on that zooxanthellae to provide it food. So, now this coral finds itself in a situation where it cannot have food. If let's suppose the adverse conditions of the ecosystem they revert in around 45 to 60 days, the conditions become normal again. The zooxanthellae can come back and repopulate these corals. But if these conditions they don't revert within 45 to 60 days, then the corals they die. And once the corals die, there is a massive impact on the marine ecosystem. Because understand, now the production of food has taken a hit, and along with that, the production of oxygen in the marine ecosystem that has also taken a substantial hit. So that is coral bleaching. So when coral polyps lose their symbiotic algae, that is the zooxanthellae, that is when they turn into that stony whitish appearance once again. Without it, the living tissues are nearly transparent, stony skeleton can be seen. It is called as coral bleaching. So if the conditions revert, conditions of ecosystem, marine ecosystem, revert, or let's say about bleaching first of all, are disturbed, the zooxanthellae or the algal population dies or leaves the corals. This leaves behind the stony whitish corals. The process is known as bleaching. The process is coral bleaching. So in the image also you can see, you have two images. The first is with zooxanthellae. Here you have the zooxanthellae population. That is why you have that unique coloration pattern of these corals. And here the zooxanthellae population has left. So you have the corals which are left like this. So if let's suppose the conditions they revert in around 45 to 60 days, that bleaching process can be reversed. Otherwise the corals will die. So the conditions due to which bleaching happens, again I will say you will study these in significant detail in environment ecology. Conditions which lead to bleaching. Basically, one of the conditions is sudden rise in sea surface temperature due to marine heat waves. For example, in the past few years, the Great Barrier Reef has gone through 3 to 4 events of mass bleaching because of a marine heat wave which developed in the Western Pacific. The Great Barrier Reef on the northeastern coast of Australia has gone through multiple phases of mass bleaching. Many of these species have been lost. Many of the varieties of corals have been lost forever. But planet has got a way to repopulate the entire thing also. So if you maintain that natural undisturbed condition for long, the repopulation can always happen. Then after that, pollution, different types of pollution, oil spill, and marine disasters. Marine disasters. And secondly, you also have the case of pollution, plastic pollution, and dumping of waste. So that will also alter the availability of sunlight for the algae or the algal population, and there also bleaching can happen. Then unsustained or unsustainable fishing activities like bottom trawling. Are we aware about what is bottom trawling? Why it is banned across the world? We are aware of it. Okay, good. So, bottom trawling also many of the times will lead to mass die offs of these corals at one go. And this is one of the major issues of contention between the fishermen in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan fishermen, and our own Tamilian fishermen. Because regardless of the ban by the various different agencies of the world and the national government also, we have few of the fishermen who still indulge in that process of bottom trawling, and that can vitiate the marine ecosystem for a long period of time. Okay, we are not aware. Okay, so what is bottom trawling is very simple. So basically, in order to catch fishes, let's suppose you have a boat. Okay, let's suppose you have a larger fishing vessel, a larger fishing boat. Now, in this fishing vessel or boat, how do you catch the fishes? So you throw a net. Now, many of the fishes, they can move away from the net. So what is done is a kind of a large net is cast, which drags against the sea floor. So this basically drags against the sea floor, drags itself against the sea floor. The purpose is to catch the fishes which might be hidden at the sea floor. But imagine the outcome of it. The outcome will be very simple. First of all, it will disturb the sediments at the sea floor. When the sediments at the sea floor will be disturbed, lot of that muddied water will be created. Secondly, it uproots many of the corals from their very base, thereby rendering them of no use at all. So that is where many of the corals, they are also uprooted. And then the ecosystem gets destroyed for many years together, because the regeneration of the ecosystem will take a lot of time. That is why the ecosystem is destroyed for many years altogether. So majority of the countries of the world, they have banned this practice of bottom trawling. The Sri Lankan fishermen, they allege that our fishermen, they carry out the process of bottom trawling in their waters, which destroys the water or the ecosystem in that area, which means that for many years their supply or the catch of fish will always be reduced. So that is why there is oftentimes indulgence of uh, small quarrel or fight between the Sri Lankan and our own Indian fishermen. That is something which you will observe very frequently across these areas. So that bottom trawling also uproots many of the corals from their entire base. Then, other than that, you also have zoonotic diseases, impact of bacterial and fungal diseases. Now, there is another factor which I would suggest you study in the portion of environment ecology in much greater detail, and that is ocean acidification due to increased emission of greenhouse gases, due to increased emission of CO2. So the ocean is basically turning acidic. It is still alkaline, but it is turning acidic, due to which the availability of availability of carbonate ions, that in itself is reducing. So the various shell bearing species or the corals, they are facing it incredibly, or finding it incredibly difficult to form that calcium carbonate exoskeleton around them. So if they are unable to synthesize that calcium carbonate, then the zooxanthellae population anyways doesn't get its nutrients and it leaves the population. So that is basically the reasons which leads to significant amount of coral bleaching. Now you have various different types of corals based upon where they are to be found. Prem Kumar pasted the question 3 times. But sir, bleaching will only affect warm water reefs or reefs having symbiotic relationship. Yes, true. What about cold water reefs or reefs that they don't have symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae? Are they immune to? What is the process of bleaching? When the zooxanthellae population leaves the corals, leaving behind that stony whitish calcium carbonate exoskeleton, that is the process of bleaching. So obviously, the ones which don't have zooxanthellae, they will not experience that. Okay, they have other forms of threats which they face, but then coral bleaching is largely a term associated when the zooxanthellae population leaves that. Yes, Prerna, they have these particular corals, the cold water corals. Most of them are chemotrophs. Ankush, why Mexico and US can't promote coral island tourism like eastern parts, or simply they just don't want to gain revenue from this? They don't have much of a well developed coral reef ecosystem. They don't. If you take a look at the region around this US, other than the Gulf of California, won't have the presence of corals. And in the Gulf of California, you have very cold waters because of the cold California current. So, not a very ideal place for tourism. And more importantly, on these coastal areas, the depth of water will be very high. Why? Because it is a convergent plate. So, there you will find deeper waters close to the coastline. Secondly, here you have the entire region of the Caribbean islands, Bahamas, the Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, the entire group of these Caribbean islands, which have a very significantly rich coral population. So people do visit them in very large numbers. For the entirety of the population of Americas, North and South, and also Europe, Caribbean is a go-to destination, right? It is just that in the eastern part, you come across this because we live in this part. Otherwise, for many parts of the Western world, Caribbean is the destination if you want to see the coral reefs. They won't come to Maldives, or they won't come to Indonesia to do that. Indonesia is still famous because of the various different diving sites that it offers. And so is the case with Philippines. Such kind of facilities or such kind of variety of corals is not to be found in the region of Maldives. That is to be found in the region around Indonesia. So that is where the tourists come. But most of the tourists, at least the high end tourists, they will always visit the Caribbean in those areas. So they don't, the US doesn't need to promote tourism on its own coast for that. And it doesn't have many of the coral population. Can La Nina effect also lead to bleaching as they heat up the Western Pacific? Yes, Anjan, very good. La Nina events, frequent occurrence of La Nina events. For example, for the past 3 years, that is preceding 2023, that is 2020, 21, 22, you had the occurrence of triple dip La Nina. 3 cases or 3 consecutive years of La Nina. So the Western Pacific was so heated up that it also led to a marine heat wave in that region, leading to a mass die off. Now, there are 3 different types of corals based upon where they are to be found. You have the fringing reef, you have the barrier reef, and you have what is known as an atoll. So, what are they? Simple meaning of these terms will help you understand their presence. Fringing reef, something which is observed across the fringes. What are the fringes? The sides, the corners. So, basically, at the boundary of the land, wherever you have that land mass, let's suppose the land is like this. Here you have water. So on these fringes where you have shallow water, if this is the entire portion of land, here you will have the growth of the corals because you have the shallow waters. That is a fringing reef. Okay. Now, as soon as the corals start growing, they will build a calcium carbonate exoskeleton. That exoskeleton will bind them to the ground, right, for almost perpetuity, for a long period of time. They become an entity on their own almost. Now, that is a fringing reef. Sometimes what happens, I hope geomorphology would be clear by now. So sometimes what happens is when we observe the formation of land, how is it that land gets created, first of all, in the first place? By volcanic action. Volcanic action in the case of the oceans or the seas that creates new land. It emerges above water, but endogenic processes which have led to the formation of land, eventually the volcano will die off, the region will become calm, stable, and maybe over a period of hundreds and thousands and millions of years, that land can even begin to subside. It can begin to subduct. That land can start moving down because we know that aperogenic forces are the ones which have an upward or the downward motion of the land associated with them. So let's suppose this is the landmass around which, first of all, the fringing reefs developed. If this landmass starts going down, what will happen? The reefs, which have become an independent entity of their own, they will maintain their structure. In certain areas, they would have come above water, forming small island-like structures. But as the land subsides, water comes in between the land and the corals. So the corals, they form a kind of a barrier around this sinking landmass, hence the name barrier reef. Now, if let's suppose the entire land sinks, leaving behind these corals, then it is known as an atoll. So let us take a look at each one of them. Fringing reef. So fringing reefs, they are formed across the coastline of the continents or the islands, and their surface is connected with the coast and rises up to low tide water level as rugged and uneven platform. Okay, so they will move up till the low tide level, not beyond that. So observe here, this is your case of a fringing reef. Okay, now imagine if there is subsidence of land. Land starts to sink. Then what will happen? As the land sinks, the corals, they are in their own place. These above water portions that you see, these will be the dead corals, the corals which would have died. So as the land sinks, here you will find shallow water bodies. Right? So that forms a kind of a barrier-like structure. So they are situated away from the coast. At one point of time, they would have been right at the coastline, but the land has subsided. And in between the coast and the reef, there's a relatively wide and deep water body or a lagoon. And the reef is also then known as a barrier reef-like structure. But imagine if this entire structure sinks, then you are left with a series of only these coral islands. Observe this image. This is an atoll. So here, observe the color of water on this side and observe the color of water here in between. There's a difference because there's a difference in depth. And here, observe the turquoise blue coloration of water. Is it because the water here is very clean? That is why you find this color? No. It is because here the base is calcium carbonate. So calcium carbonate means whitish, means greater reflection of light. That is why the water will give you that appearance or that coloration. In these areas, the water is very deep, very deep. Why? Because if you take a look at the structure of these, you will observe that the land has basically sunk in this area. So, when we talk about the region of Maldives and Lakshadweep with hashtag boycott Maldives being the spirit here. So observe here, you have a similarity of structure all the way up till Diego Garcia. These are your atolls. What do we mean by these are the atolls? So where is the land which would have sunk to form this? And aren't atolls supposed to be circular? So not always. Here, basically, in this region of the Indian Ocean, if you observe the map of the Indian Ocean, here you will have the presence of the Chagos range of mountains. Underwater seamounts now they are. At one point of time, there were mountain ranges here. The Chagos range, located in the map. Okay. Over a period of millions of years, when these corals they build structure one on top of other, and let's suppose the associated mountain, if there is a mountain range, then on the sides of the mountain you will have the fringing reef. Eventually when the entire mountain will sink, you will have unique pattern of these atolls which are left surviving. So Lakshadweep, Maldives, all of them, they are a resultant from this Chagos range, and they are atolls created as this Chagos range underwent subsidence and went underwater. These are the coral islands which got left behind. Okay, so even the sinking of seamounts, or even in the region of seamounts, for example, you can have the accretion and accumulation of corals, and you can have a coral island form there. Or in the region where it starts to sink, that is where the leftover coral islands, they will be atolls. So mostly these atolls you will find mostly, so these are the most common type of coral reefs and are roughly circular or horseshoe shaped reefs. So mostly circular or horseshoe, based upon, because in majority of the parts of the world, the corals, they have always grown around these islands, around these island chains where you had shallow waters. And most of the islands, you will find in the longer run, they are circular, oval in shape, most of these islands. So as they would have subsided, as they would have sunk, they would have left behind the island structure all around them in the form of that white sand structure and the island formation that we talked about. That is the shape associated with most of these atolls. So here you will observe that it has got a steep outer slope leading to very deep waters and a shallow water region. So here you can figure out here itself that a portion of the land has sunk here. Okay, so the next time any of your friends, colleagues, influencers, anyone shows you an image that, look, the water there was so clean, the beaches here are so very dirty, the water is not clean, don't get swayed by that. It is not as if the water is very clean. It is just the fact that at the base there is calcium carbonate. That is why the water appears in that way. Otherwise, water does not change so drastically between, let's suppose, a Lakshadweep to a Maldives, or let's suppose the western coast of India to these island regions. Okay. Now, this is the entire atoll formation from the formation of the land itself. So basically, the land is created due to the volcanic process, which leads to an island formation. Eventually, once the land stabilizes, and let's suppose it starts subducting. So by the time that stabilization of land has happened, you will find these coral structures to be in existence, the fringing reefs. As the land subsides, some of that coral structure would have by that point of time come above water also, forming small islands, and a lagoon like water body would have been formed between the land and the corals, or a barrier reef. Eventually, when the land completely sinks, you are left with the island like structure, which is atoll. Okay, so that is the case of corals. We have seen what corals are, what are warm water corals, what is the condition for their growth, why do they experience bleaching, where we have seen what is bleaching. We have seen that the bleaching occurs when the temperature increases, when, let's suppose, pollution, oil spill happens, or plastic pollution happens, or let's suppose excess sedimentation happens, or let's suppose unsustainable fishing activities like bottom trawling, or let's suppose zoonotic diseases. What is the coral triangle? What are fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and atolls? And then the importance of these corals. So basically, corals, they support a wide amount of biodiversity. A very distinct biodiversity is supported by these corals. Now, when we talk about these corals, this biodiversity also provides, we are talking about marine biodiversity. So that marine biodiversity also provides the scope for lot of fishes. So the regions around these corals, they are always very rich in terms of fish catch, the catch of the fishes. So they support a large population for the fisheries sector. Tourism is also one of the sector in these areas of coral reefs, which provides very significant revenue. So as you can see, close to around 500 million people across the world, they are directly or indirectly supported through the provision or the services of these corals. These corals, they are being explored even for the medicinal purposes, and they are not only beneficial significantly for the marine ecosystem, but here you will also observe that they provide you with a kind of a natural barrier against storm surges, tsunamis sometimes, etc. Okay. So, for example, here, let's suppose you have the landmass. Now, when you have the presence of, let's suppose, a coral or a barrier reef, etc., it will be like this. So, any wave, any giant wave which develops, let's suppose, and moves ahead, that wave will break upon hitting these corals immediately. So, the impact of it will almost be moderated, if not completely diminished, by the time it reaches the coastline or the shoreline. That is why we say that they buffer the shorelines from the effect of cyclones and also hurricanes. So these are the importances attached with corals. These reefs are attached with land, with sinking land. Why reefs don't? Because by that point of time, they have developed that calcium carbonate exoskeleton, which has fixated them to the even the ground, sea floor. So they become an entity in themselves. So as the land base, see, it is not as if today land was there, tomorrow land will start sinking like this. Even the sinking of land we have seen is a very slow process. It might take millions and millions of years. The sinking might happen at the rate of 1 millimeter every 100 years, right? So by that point of time, it is such a slow process that the corals will be able to form the linkages of calcium carbonate all around it. It will manage to stay in that region as the and free itself of the land. That is why they continue to remain afloat. And horseshoe shaped coral reefs, basically horseshoe shape. What is a horseshoe? This is a horseshoe. So that shape of coral reefs. Any oil spillage, how does affect this? It will kill the corals. Oil spills, the sticky oil will stick on the corals, and the corals will experience bleaching and they will die off. How land sinks? The upward motion and the downward motion of the land associated with the folding, faulting, and also epirogenic forces in endogenic forces in general that can lead to the sinking of the land. Basically, sir, fringing, barrier, and atoll formation happen in time difference. Yes, they can. Lakshadweep development plan of 2021 have reduced coral due to mining. See, that development plan, first of all, has still not been implemented. I hope you are aware that Lakshadweep doesn't have a supply of clean drinking water. I hope we are aware of that. Desalination plant has been set up. Now, for that, you do need the avail because if you want people to live there, you do need water, clean water. Have you ever thought about it? Where will Lakshadweep get its water from? Think about it. So for that you need a desalination plant. For that you need a space to construct. Where will you construct in these small islands? So some areas, in case, see, there are two options in front of us. One option is we leave Lakshadweep as an ignored island, which has sadly been the strategy for many years, where India has, and there's a very beautiful book written on it also, Our Strategic Dilemma, where India has virtually seen the islands as a kind of a burden that, other than the mainland, we have to take care of the administration of these islands also. That is one way to look at it. And our strategic think tank for some time has seen the islands as a kind of a liability. But islands are always an asset. Why is it that China is trying to construct artificial islands in South China Sea to bolster its claim there? Because, see, in defense forces and defense services, you can always spend tens of thousands of crores and build an aircraft carrier. What will the aircraft carrier do? Aircraft carrier takes your defense forces farther away from the mainland and provides the support far away from mainland. But if a missile hits the aircraft carrier sinks, your entire defense posture goes down the sea. That is why Andaman, Nicobar, and Lakshadweep, they are referred to as the unsinkable aircraft carriers that India has. These islands provide us with a strategic advantage. For that, we need adequate support. We need adequate logistics. So, take a leaf out of China's book here. What does China do to bolster its claim in any particular area in the bordering region of Himalayas? What is the modus operandi of China? They will build a village, populate the village with some of its own inhabitants, and that is how they claim that this has always been their case in land. In our islands, we did not have the infrastructure to support the local inhabitants. I hope we are aware that the region of Lakshadweep, if you need some amount of medical attention, some advanced medical attention, you need to go to Kochi. If let's suppose you have a stormy weather, if let's suppose you have rough seas or monsoon season, your flight to Kochi can always get cancelled. So you will be left in the island without any medical intervention. So there can be one approach that ignore the islands, let the original inhabitants live as they are with the bare minimum amount of infrastructure, or own up these islands, develop them. Once you develop them, it can always be a sustainable development. So, and it is a reality, regardless of how controversial it may be, it is a reality. When you will carry out some construction, there will be temporary disruption which will be caused. But if you carry out in a sustainable process, that disruption can be limited. And now you have technologies which can, for example, cryomesh. Cryomesh technology is the one which is developed to save the genetic variety of the corals to help them repopulate the region at a later period of time. So that can be brought in. Or you can have biorock technology. You can repopulate the area with the corals, provided you don't destroy the entire ecosystem. But first of all, we need a kind of convergence on this point. Do we need these areas to be developed? Or do we need these areas to be the anthropogenic museums for the world? That come visit these islands, we will show you how the humans initially lived when you did not have modern infrastructure. So that is the key point that we need to answer and address as a nation. Once we find the solution that yes, development is required, we move forward. Once we find a solution that no development is required, that region needs to be that region needs to remain untouched, regardless of the social indicators, etc. Fair enough. You leave those islands as they are. They will serve as a liability. Why is it that everybody is so concerned that China is having a deal with Maldives? China will have its defense forces in Maldives. So what? We have Lakshadweep. We can have our naval forces in Lakshadweep. But then what? Will these naval forces have support? No. Why? Because infrastructure you have not built. Why? Because you treated the islands as a liability. So for the past couple of years, in fact, for the past 2 to 3 years, UPSC has been asking questions about this. This question has, or this particular topic has emerged or erupted as a national headline very recently. But UPSC, because the government has been concerned about this for the past few years now. So UPSC, if you take up the question paper of UPSC for the last year, even for this year for that matter, why to go for last year, even this year, in the optional paper there was a direct question: discuss about the ecotourism potential of Indian islands and discuss the challenges. So, what is happening is in tune with the trend of discussion which was going on for quite some time now. Okay, so always, if a question is asked that this development is leading to this destruction, what should be done? Answer as a candidate should always be we should develop sustainably without damaging the ecosystem. For example, you had the yesterday you had the inauguration of Atal Setu in Mumbai. regardless of the political bickering and the political naming, etc., which is done. Try to listen to the interviews of the IAS officers who are present in the municipal corporation and observe the language there. They will always tell you that the mud flats, they required conservation, the flamingos required conservation. We went for sustainable development. We cannot basically compromise the requirement of the citizens, so we had the requirement of the infrastructure, but we needed to conserve ecosystem at a greater priority, sustainable development. Always. That should be the template of your answer always. Okay? Now, after this, we move ahead to the portion of Indian geography. But before that, we'll take a break. And oil doesn't go inside water. The heavy, basically unrefined crude, some of that does sink in, and we are talking about shallow waters. So basically, they will have that slick deposit on the corals. Okay, and if you have the black crude which spreads over, they will block sunlight. So prior to 1700, Mumbai was also parted in several islands. That is true. How the corals cure cancer and other diseases? The microbes, the which are found in them, they are found to have some amount of. Still, research is going on. It is in very formative stages. They can be served as a kind of a pharmaceutical ingredient. Okay, so let's take a break. And how long a break? Okay, we'll give a 20 minutes break and be back in 20 minutes. Okay, it is a Saturday, so have a long break and be back. We will continue with the portion of Indian geography. A confirmation about the audio, please. If the audio is clear and available. Thank you. So now we initiate the portion of Indian geography. In general, when you talk about the portion of Indian geography from the point of view of your examination, it is always more associated with what you see in your surroundings. And the questions that are asked from this area will mostly be revolving around the areas which have been in news, which have been in discussion. So, unlike the portion of the world and the physical geography that we have studied, in this portion, you have to keep your eye and ear out for the developments in the current affairs which you observe. So, in this portion of Indian geography, what is it that we are going to cover overall? So, Indian geography, its entire coverage. And this is going to be pretty straightforward, a theoretical portion it is. So, here, first of all, we'll start with Indian physiography. Physiography. After that, we will move ahead. Climate is something that we have already seen and studied. So, drainage systems, and rivers. Then, forest, soil, where you study about soil erosion, degradation, conservation. Then, agriculture, minerals and industries. And then also population settlement. So these are the areas that we shall be covering in significant detail. Always for the portion of geography, Indian geography, always associate it with the portion of current affairs. Current affairs. Okay, that is how you can basically forecast or you can have a prediction about which are the areas which are going to be relevant for your examination. For example, right now we have discussed about Lakshadweep in significant detail. So ecotourism potential of Lakshadweep, the atoll formation, etc., that can always be asked. Now we start the discussion with the portion of India's location and the physiographic division. So for the prelims, it is here that you also get the questions about the maps, location of physiographic divisions, divisions. Then you will also find questions associated with the areas around features, Himalayas, features of the Himalayas. Do we recall the process of formation of Himalayas? Or is it something that we have forgotten as the previous birth? I hope we recall the process of formation. Then also the aspect of location of Tropic of Cancer, and Indian Standard Meridian, the states through which it passes, location of the islands, details of the islands. For the mains examination, from this area, again, questions have been asked quite repeatedly. Occurrence of landslides in Himalayas, features of the Deccan Trap, of physiographic divisions, then formation or lack of formation rather, lack of delta formation across western coastline. From these areas in the mains examination, the question has often been repeated. Now, here we will study the location and the physiographic division of the country. Now, in all the books that you will study, they will tell you that, okay, Himalayas are present here, northern plains are present here, the plateaus are present here, these are the names of the plateaus, these are the names of the eastern coastal plains in various areas. They will go for a fact-based analysis. As a result of that, the candidates, they end up rote learning this. Many of the times, having a tendency to forget these. We are going to follow a different approach when we study this. Something that you don't find in the books, obviously. So we are going to follow an approach where we are going to talk about the formation of each of these physiographic divisions. Why? Why do we need to go there? That will first of all help you understand not only about the properties of the physiographic division in detail, but if you know the how is it that the Peninsular Plateau came into existence, why is it that Deccan Traps have a different kind of a formation as compared to a Chota Nagpur Plateau, you will also be able to understand why the region of Chota Nagpur Plateau has red soil, why the Deccan Plateau has Deccan Trap has black soil. You will also be able to then formulate why is it the case that the region of or the mineral rich regions in India are only concentrated in around 10 to 11 states. I'm sure you would have wondered it in your thoughts if you have. Basically, why all the minerals and the mines are present in the region of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Karnataka, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and some parts of Rajasthan. Why is it so? Why don't we have the presence of minerals such as coal in the region of Uttar Pradesh? We have it in the southeastern part, but in the rest of it. Why don't we have rich iron deposits in the region of Uttar Pradesh or Haryana or Punjab? So, soil and the soil distribution of India, mineral distribution of India, all of that comes as a natural follow up if you know about the origin of the physiographic divisions. Having said that, let me also attach a caveat, because I do have many of the candidates who come to me eventually that, sir, you had said, told it in so much detail. I only needed the small notes which I can rote learn or memorize. So for that, you have the additional reading materials or the NCRT or the PPT where you can go through it. You can basically memorize the requirement for GS and you can be done with it. This is just to basically quench your curiosity. I do hope that you have this curiosity within yourself. How is it that the Andaman Nicobars were formed? We have talked about it. But why is it that, for example, the continental shelf in the western coast is much wider as compared to the shelf area in the eastern coastline? Yesterday, you had Ankush asking about this question. Why is it that the region of Rajasthan has got oil reserves? Why is it that marble and limestone is found there? How is it that Deccan traps have got this kind of a layered formation? When did that happen? Why do they have basaltic rocks when the basaltic rocks are mostly to be found underneath the oceans? So that all those particular inquisitiveness, all those particular curiosities, and your overall understanding will be much better if you are able to find a genesis about the entire formation, and that will help you in later portions. But having said that, in case you are unable to suppose understand the formation of maybe the Peninsular Plateau of Western, it is not the end of the world. UPSC is not going to ask you in detail, talk about the detailed formation, even though last year UPSC did venture out of its way and ask a question that discuss about the properties of the Deccan traps. Now, those of them who had simply ratified it or wrote learned it from the NCRT, they only had 2 to 3 sentences that they could write. And it is here that few of our candidates, they actually did particularly well, where they could talk about the entire evolution and the process. So it is a kind of a mixed bag. So first of all, we start with the case of the location of the country. India, the home to us all, the mother of civilizations that we refer, the melting pot of civilizations is what this land has always been referred to as. When we say melting pot of civilization, various different civilizations, various different people from various different areas have come to this country. And rather than making the country as one of theirs, this country has made them one of its own. We have that power of assimilation. From north to south, from east to west, from center to the islands, wherever you go, diversity is what you find. Diversity in climate, from the coldest areas in the region of Kargil and Dras to one of the warmest areas in the region of Jaisalmer and western Rajasthan, to the dry deserts of Thar, to the rainiest area of Cherrapunji Mawsynram, from the mighty mountains of the Himalayas to the individual islands and pristine coral beaches. We literally have it all. From the mineral rich plateaus to some of the most fertile plains of the world, we definitely have it all. Now, this is one particular such land where, as you move for a few hundred kilometers, the language changes, the food changes, the customary tradition changes, the religion, the faith, the belief, everything changes. The way of life changes. And that is because this has always been a land of geographical diversity. Geographical diversity breeds in social diversity, economic diversity, political diversity. This is a land which is known as a subcontinent. Not many areas are the ones where you hear this term subcontinent. Why is India referred to as a subcontinent? Because again, we have an assimilation of all various different types of cultures, traditions, etc., which we call our home. Different races of people. And you do, when you study about the population in detail, you have people of various different races, different origins. We find them naturally living in India and living in India for a very long period of time. You have people who are descendants from the African origin in substantial amount, Australoids, right? All these people are naturally found to be present in our country. So we are a land of diversity. We are a land of distinct topography, distinct climate, distinct physiography, and hence An entirety of subcontinent is included here. That is why there was a very famous adage which always used to prevail. If you want to study the world, study India. And today, as it goes, find the solution to the problems in India, you eventually find the solutions to the problems of the world. Because the problems that the world will face tomorrow, India might be facing today. And we can be a kind of a beacon of hope going ahead into that chaotic world. Now, India has always been a land of prosperity and self sufficiency. Very rarely would you come across ancient historical records where any of the rulers or the kingdoms in India, they actually felt the need to move abroad, expand their territories outside this particular subcontinent. Other than the mighty Cholas, for whom it is said that they turned the entirety of Bay of Bengal into a giant Chola lake, where they would have their conquest all the way till Cambodia and Indonesia and Sri Lanka. But other than that, you will never come across any of these kind of territorial expansion outside. Why? Because we are a country in the tropical region of the world. Sufficiency of food has always been there. And whichever countries have had a historical sufficiency of food, you'll find they are much more content within themselves. They know that they will get food at the end of the day. Now, historical evidences point out, for example, when you take a look at the Roman scriptures and the Roman records, the records by Pliny Senior himself, that talks about shiploads of gold coins moving across to the coastlines of India for trade. India had been the supplier of goods, and the Romans did not have anything to exchange in return. So they would have to basically give us these gold coins. You have the ancient port cities on the western coast, such as Muziris, which have come to light, which indicates the prosperity that India always had. In fact, in one of those lost diaries of Vasco da Gama, which presently is again in UK. Now, one of the excerpts of those diaries talk about how Vasco da Gama, when he was trying to find out the pathway to India, he came to the region of Cape of Good Hope. Now, there, upon inquiring with the people around, he wanted to find out the route to India. So he was informed that there is actually an Indian sailor in the region of Cape of Good Hope. You should go and contact him. And what Vasco da Gama writes is basically he came across this Indian sailor, Indian merchant, very rich, very prosperous. He writes his name also, whose ship was almost 4 to 5 times bigger than what the Portuguese ship that Vasco da Gama had brought. So we have had our moments of prowess scattered all the way along the history. It is lately, that is, for the past few centuries, if you consider, the Indian story had suffered a disastrous decline due to many of the policies of colonization that was inflicted upon us. But after we have gained independence, for various different ways and measures, we have basically marched forward. India has moved ahead. And more importantly than that, where we have moved, how much we have moved, more importantly than that, there is no denying the fact that in the coming 100 years, India is the place to be. India is the place to look out for. This is a country which basically can achieve the world and more. Why? Partly because of the cultural ethos. And I'm not talking about religious ethos, I'm talking about the cultural ethos. As a society, we value knowledge, we value wisdom, we have certain reverences which are traditionally associated to gaining information, to gaining knowledge, and also our penchant and that willingness to achieve something more than what we already are. So there is only one way for India to go, and that is up. Now, India's location in itself is something which can be looked as an envy by our many competitors. We sit atop the Indian Ocean. Not many countries of the world can basically boast that we have an ocean named the name after the country. We have the Indian Ocean. We sit atop the Indian Ocean. Now that gives us with a unique advantage. Majority of the bulk trade going around the world, majority of that trade moves by the sea routes or the shipping lanes. And with the rise of the Asian powers, the shipping routes of Indian Ocean are busier than ever. Most of these international sea lanes, they pass very close to India. India stands to gain economically, strategically, owing to its location. Our location in the Indian Ocean provides us with a very unique vantage point when it comes to providing overall security. Our Navy has got a doctrine to become a blue water Navy. That is, the ability to defend very far away from the coastline. You need not be tethered or attached to the coast. From Gulf of Aden in the west to Strait of Malacca in the east, the naval spread is truly becoming fascinating. In the entire region of Indian Ocean, Indian Navy and the Indian Armed Forces are amongst the strongest in the region. That is why India and the Indian Navy seeks itself to be the net security provider of this area. But not only that, we are not only restricted to that. We have had various different defense forces movement which have happened, defense exercises, or rather various different programs which have happened. For example, you had Operation Cactus, by which again Maldives is in news. So our defense forces went over to Maldives to save its president. We have had that. But more than that, there's a cultural connect with the regions across the Indian Ocean. Mauritius, for example, is a country which has got many of the people as descendants from India. Third, fourth, fifth generation Indians, they populate that area. We have a cultural connect. Similar is the case with Indonesia. We have that cultural connect. People to people contact is what India truly has always believed in. And even today, if a disaster strikes anywhere in the region, India is amongst the first country to respond. So, humanitarian and disaster relief operations is something that we pride in. When cyclones hit the region around Reunion Islands, it is the Indian Navy which goes with the desalination plants to provide clean drinking water. When you had the Houthi rebels basically having a civil war initiated in the region of Yemen, the Indian forces airlifted people from 26 different countries, and the Indian Navy evacuated people from 26 different countries as per Operation Rahat. So, our view of the world goes much beyond the traditional aggrandizement of territorial expansion. That is where our location comes to a significant advantage. But if we talk about the real politique, the Machiavellian school of thought of politics, if we talk about where the real politics is what matters, our location provides us with a unique advantage in order to have that stranglehold over our enemies. You would be aware that during, or many of you would be very young or might not even be born at the time of the Kargil War. Now, as the Kargil War was getting stretched beyond what was our original estimate, and it was clear that the Pakistan armed forces are responsible directly, they are involved directly. Indian Navy had organized a blockade and was a few days away from imposing the naval blockade of Pakistan. And our location would have allowed us to do so, where basically the Indian ships would be stationed in this wide perimeter. Any ship or vessel moving into Pakistan would have had to enter through that security cordon provided by the Indian Navy. And we would have basically brought about an economic shutdown of the trade and services in Pakistan because our location allows us to do so. Now, majority of the trade of China from the oil-rich regions of the Gulf, that goes through the region of Strait of Malacca, through this portion. Now, this distance is only a few hundred kilometers from the Indira Point in Andaman Nicobar to the region of Indonesia. Indian Navy can basically again choke this point. This is a choke point. And if push comes to shove, India can basically decide to impose a blockade, thereby stymieing China's entire trade across the eastern coastline. It is because of this reason that China now wants access to the warmer waters of Arabian Sea, and that is why it is building the China-Pakistan economic corridor, linking the region of Arabian Sea directly to China. That is the prowess or the benefit that you have of location. Various different strategic thinkers of the past, they have always said that the ones who control the oceans and the seas of the world, they control the world eventually. India, with its location, is an ideal case in point, where we have our control over the vast region of water body, allowing us trade facilities, defense facilities, strategic advantages throughout. Now, you had the ex-Moldavian president, Abdul Gayoom, who famously said that the 19th century belonged to the Atlantic. And that was the phase when the countries along the Atlantic grew. The 20th century belonged to the Pacific, where the countries across the Pacific, the North American countries, the East Asian countries, they grew. The 21st century is going to be the century of the Indian Ocean. And India sitting atop the Indian Ocean will only gain advantage out of that. But not only our maritime borders. Our maritime international borders, they give us some unique advantage. You have to think that these islands that we have, they are like an extended arm of our strategic control in these waters. These are our unsinkable aircraft carriers. That provides the unique defense advantage that no other country in this region can even dream of having. If infrastructure development goes ahead, then this will leave India in an unparalleled situation to the envy of the world. But when we talk about our land borders, we have a very long land border as well. We share very significantly good and historical relationships with the countries such as Nepal, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh. Now they share a very long and contiguous borders with us. Now, the trade along these borders benefits these countries along with us. For example, if Nepal wants to carry out trade, international trade, it has to move goods through the sea route, bulk goods through the sea route. Now, despite how much China is trying to build up the infrastructure right up till Kathmandu, the reality of the matter is that the shortest distance from Nepal to the port is offered by India. Same is the case with Bhutan, same is the case Bangladesh provides us connectivity from the eastern portion to the rest of the central portion of the country. So we, because of the diversity and culture, the diversity in terms of geography, we provide a wide prism of life that possibly no other country can represent that diversity. Regardless of how much the Western world preaches us about diversity, the importance of having diversity, they can never even begin to emulate, they can never even begin to fathom the diversity that we have. We have the diversity, even if you talk about ancient civilizations. While you had the very thriving Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization, there are evidences to indicate that there were simultaneous civilizations 3,000 years back in the region of Tamil Nadu, in the region of Jharkhand, in various areas of central India. We have diversity of civilizations going back for more than 5,000 years across the country. The country is something which you truly need to move around to understand. But that is something which is represented by the energy of the population. And that is why one has to be only hopeful. And one can, in fact, only be hopeful for the future prospect of country India. And the next few classes we are going to devote in order to study this beautiful land of ours, in order to understand its intricacies, limitations, advantages, and also the various distinct features. Okay? Now, after this, we start basically with the case of the location. Sir, please. Sir, please. What, please? Prelims very short question ask means that they ask short questions in prelims. They ask multiple choice questions in prelims. I hope you are aware of the pattern of the prelims. They ask the multiple choice questions in prelims. We have discussed the prelims questions. I'm unable to understand the doubt if there is any. So please elaborate the doubt. Amritansh, no. As of now, not a published one, but I have written a couple of them for internal security, for strategy, but about very short. Uh, what kind of question are you? Either are you afraid of a certain kind of a question, then you have this, or I'll show you the. We have been discussing the prelims questions previously. So where is that doubt coming from is something I'm unable to fathom. These are the questions, type of questions that you observe in the prelims. These are the type of questions that you observe in prelims. Have you not attended any of the PYQ discussions, my dear friend? We have discussed many of the PYQs till now. Have you not observed any of the not witnessed any of the PYQ discussion? These are the pattern of the questions that you observe in prelims, multiple choice questions. Okay. So means you have not been attending the sessions. That is why you have not attended the PYQs. Now, why I have talked about the India, its location and strategic advantages is this will also help you write an essay, because questions have been asked in the essay that discuss about the geopolitical potential and advantage that India has sitting atop the Indian Ocean, and then also about, let's suppose, what are the advantages of India's location. These kind of questions, why India is referred to as a subcontinent, these kind of questions have been asked in UPSC in the mains. Okay. Now, the location of India. So, India lies entirely in the northern hemisphere. The extent of the country, the mainland, begins from around 8 degree north, 8 degree 4 minutes north, up till 37 degree 6 minutes north. And the east to west expanse goes from around 68 degree 7 minutes east to around 97 degree 25 minutes east longitude. So that is the entire expanse of the mainland. But the southernmost point will be the Indira Point in the Great Nicobar Islands. That Indira Point is situated at 6 degree 4 minutes north. Tropic of Cancer passes almost through the center of the country. Okay, this is the locational. Now here, ideally, you should be able to look at which are the states through which the Tropic of Cancer passes through, for example. Immediately, you should be curious enough to look at it in the map. Which are the major cities almost on the region of Tropic of Cancer? That is how you explore the map. That is how you explore the country. Okay. So when it comes to the time zone, we basically observe the time. The Indian Standard Meridian is 82 degree 30 minutes east. Indian Standard Meridian. Okay. So that is the one which we use for looking at the time. This Indian Standard Time, or IST, is with respect to the Greenwich Mean Time. What is the proportion? It is ahead by 5.5 hours to the Greenwich Mean Time. So that means if in Greenwich, if in India right now, let's suppose it is 10 a.m. So in Greenwich, it would be how much? Around 4:30 a.m. in Greenwich. Okay. So that is basically the case of Indian time zone. Now, the states through which Tropic of Cancer passes through. Which Tropic of Cancer passes? Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. I hope by these acronyms you are able to identify. West Bengal, Tripura, and Mizoram. Okay, these are the 8 states through which the Tropic of Cancer does pass through. Do look at it with the political map of the country in slightly greater detail. Now, when we talk about the Indian Standard Meridian, that passes through again 5 states. So it passes through the region around Mirzapur in Uttar Pradesh, the region made famous by the help of the TV series which was made on that. So it passes through there. It touches the border of Madhya Pradesh. So Madhya Pradesh is also included, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and Andhra Pradesh. So if a question is asked that how many states have the presence of both the Tropic of Cancer and the Standard Meridian, how many states have the presence of both Tropic of Cancer and the Standard Meridian? Very good. You have 2 states, that is Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. Which is the state where the Tropic of Cancer will converge with the Indian Standard Meridian? They will intersect. UP. Tropic of Cancer does not even pass through UP. It will be very simple, guys. Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh is the state where the Tropic of Cancer will crisscross the Standard Meridian. That is why I'm telling you, don't rote learn, observe it on the map. Now, when we talk about India and the states, so we share the international boundary with almost all the states have one or the other international boundary. Now, here, many of you have a lot of misconception, by the way. If I ask you, so let me solve that. If I ask you Maharashtra, Karnataka, Goa, do they share an international boundary? Yes or no? So Anjan and Shreyas and Brajneet and Udayrani. Three of you are correct. Amritansh also, rest of you are incorrect. When you think about Rajasthan, does it share an international boundary? Here everybody will say yes. When we talk about the region of Jammu Kashmir, international boundary it shares? Yes. When we say Uttarakhand, it shares an international boundary? Yes. When we talk about Odisha, does it share an international boundary? No. So that is basically because from our childhood days, whenever we have been talked about, whenever we have thought about international boundary, we always have imagined a land where there are fences. Somehow, basically, Sunny Deol comes in, it takes our troops to victory, he takes our troops to victory, and that is the international boundary for all of us, for many of us. Sadly, that is the scenario. I hate to break the bubble for many of you, but even the coastlines, they serve as an international boundary. Even the coastlines of the states have the international boundary. If that would not have been the case, then you could have said that Australia doesn't have an international boundary at all because it is like an island. Indonesia doesn't have an international boundary at all, does it? Because it is an island. I hope we are aware. If we are not aware, take up any blank piece of map that you would have bought or purchased from the store in 6th standard, 7th standard, etc. There is written at the bottom of the map, India's territorial waters extend up till 12 nautical miles from the shoreline. Beyond that, you have the international waters, right? So that is where your navy is deployed. In the territorial waters, you have the deployment of the coast guards. Naval deployment happens mostly in the international waters. Okay, so the coastal areas that you see, that you think that they're not fit enough to be regarded as international, they are also international borders. For international border, you need not have those fences and then the hero moving from one side to another. Okay, so almost all the states of the country, they share an international border other than Haryana, the National Capital Territory of Delhi, the region of Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Telangana. Other than these, all the states, they share an international border. Okay? Now, India shares land boundary with Myanmar, China, Bhutan, Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, with longest border being with Bangladesh and the shortest border with Afghanistan. I hope we are aware of this fact that the longest border that India shares is with Bangladesh and the shortest border is with Afghanistan. Sri Lanka and Maldives are the two island countries with which we share our maritime borders. Okay? Now, here, basically, that is the case. Now, the shortest border with Afghanistan. This is again a point of interest. Now, ideally, when you think about Afghanistan, you don't think of Afghanistan as our natural neighbor. But if you observe the map carefully here, India shares an international border with Afghanistan. Now, this region of Afghanistan, this portion of Afghanistan with which India shares its border, this is a panhandle shaped land. If I can take you back to this map here, this panhandle shaped land, this is with which India shares its international border. It is a different matter altogether that this region of Gilgit Baltistan is under the occupation of Pakistan as of now. So, in real politique or in real world, Right now, we don't have access to our borders with Afghanistan. But as per our constitution, as per our parliament, as per the national will and consensus, that is our own international border. Now, this panhandle shaped region of Afghanistan, that is what is referred to as the Wakhan corridor. This is the region of the Wakhan corridor, which has been historically very important. It is not something which has become important recently, it has been historically very important. Because all to the north and to the south of the Wakhan corridor, this is a region dotted with very high mountains, where it is very difficult to move, navigate from one region to another. It is this area of Wakhan corridor which provides that kind of passage, that way of movement that is provided by the Wakhan corridor. So historically, this has been used by traders and travelers. It is not as if Wakhan corridor is going to be at sea level. It is also at few thousand meters above sea level, but it still provides you with a kind of a way of passage where the travelers and the traders moving from the region of Europe to China, they would always have historically used the Wakhan corridor. Now, if you basically, all of you are great fans of history, I gather. All of you would have read history quite significantly. You would have read about Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler and trader with the name of Marco Polo. Now, the story of Marco Polo, basically, that you would have read or you would have been aware about. Marco Polo went to the court of the Mongol king, one of the great Mongol kings, Kublai Khan. You would have heard about the name Kublai Khan when you would have heard about the token currency system. When you study the portion of medieval history, you study that how Muhammad bin Tughlaq introduced token currency and how that was a failure. But basically, the person who also instituted it and was a partial success was Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan, who was a great Mongol king, under whose aegis the kingdom of Mongols significantly expanded. So, when Marco Polo did visit the court of Kublai Khan and stayed there, he did describe about this Wakhan corridor in significant detail about how this can provide to be a bridge between the east and the west, and it has served as a bridge. Now, with India basically exerting its control over the entirety of the region, and India for a long period of time had ignored the infrastructure development in this area. But for the past 15 to 17 years, we have paid significant attention. For example, in the late 1950s, in the region here that you see as the Karakoram Pass, China had constructed a highway. That Karakoram highway connected China with the region of Pakistan. And it passed very close to our borders, and we could not threaten it, we could not do anything. But for the past few years, what India has done, we have activated an airfield around 8 kilometers from the Karakoram Pass. 8 kilometers. In military parlance, it is a stone throw away. 8 kilometers, even though in mountainous areas, 8 kilometers can be quite substantial. But your mortars, your cannons, your guns can easily have a target up till that. So here, we have activated the northernmost airfield and one of the highest airfields, active airfields in the world, in the name of the DBO sector. You would have heard about the DBO. Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan, they are very different. Don't confuse between them. The DBO airfield. Daulat Beg Oldie. Not bag, beg. Daulat Beg Oldie. This is the northernmost airfield of India. In fact, one of the propositions or one of the explanations why China did attack and did have that Galwan Valley clash is because of the sudden spurt in infrastructural developments that India is doing in these areas. As a consequence of that, China is seeking an alternative route to Pakistan in order to reach the region of Arabian Sea. And that is where plans are afoot in order to construct a tunnel system and a network of highways through this Wakhan corridor and then connect to Pakistan. Now, that is a way of China exerting its influence into the neighboring mineral rich country of Afghanistan. This is the natural border with Afghanistan, is one of those areas where India says and pitches itself as a natural neighbor of Afghanistan. That is the reason why we want to be a part of the various international delegations and the conferences which have been meeting over the past decade to decide about the future of Afghanistan. India has always cited that, look, we are natural and historical neighbors of Afghans. So we need to have a say about what goes on in our vicinity. But this is where Pakistan comes in and basically says that, look, what you are saying is incorrect. You don't share your borders with Afghanistan anymore. The region that you are citing as an international border, that is under our occupation. So that is where the arguments fly here and there. Okay, so that is about the location where Wakhan corridor is. I hope that is clear. Now we come to the portion of physiography. Physiography is the topographical variation that you observe in a certain area. So physiography of an area is the outcome of the structure, process, and the stage of development. India can overall be divided into 6 different physiographical divisions: northern and the northeastern mountains, the northern plains, the peninsular plateau, the Indian desert, the coastal plains, and also the islands. So, here, one by one, let us take a look at this. So, northern and northeastern mountains, we have seen about their formation. The formation is how? Formation, for those who basically have not attended the previous classes, kindly look at the module 3 and the recordings of that. We have discussed in various different details the stages of the formation of Himalayas. So, convergence of European or Eurasian and Indian plate. That is the process of formation. Now, when we take a look at the Himalayas, these are a kind of a consistent mountain range spanning from the northwestern part of the country all the way to the northeast, having a convex bend in between. Now, when we say a mountain ranges, we are talking about these parallel ranges. Now, you have 3 of these ranges which are parallel from the west almost to the east. These are the Himalayan ranges. So, when we talk about the Himalayan ranges, they include the 3 ranges: Himadri or the Great Himalayas, Himachal or the Middle Himalayas, and then the Shivaliks or the Outer Himalayas. A very cute question has come in. Does India have full control over Indian Ocean? No. India is not even seeking to have a full control over Indian Ocean. That will be a wrong statement to make diplomatically, strategically, and otherwise. Why do you think that India will have full control over Indian Ocean? Just because of the name, or is there any other doubt? Basically, in the Indian Ocean, Indian Navy is the most powerful navy, but the Chinese Navy has been making inroads. See, when it comes to sovereignty and the control, The control is up till 12 nautical miles from the shoreline. That belongs to your territorial waters. Then up till around 200 nautical miles from the shoreline, that is your economically exclusive zone, where you can exploit that region for your own economic resources. You can extract oil, you can have the fisheries, etc., belonging to you. So that 1200 nautical miles from the shoreline is your EEZ. But your territorial waters are only up till 12 nautical miles. So any foreign vessel which has to enter into your territorial waters has to gain permission. Okay. Now, by the way, you have, if you observe these Himalayas, you will observe that there are certain ranges which are present here, but they are not a part of this continuous mountain range from east to west. They are present in sporadic occurrences. These are known as trans Himalayas or beyond the Himalayas. So, trans Himalayas basically means the Zaskar, Karakoram, Ladakh, and Kailash ranges. So these are basically what are known as trans Himalayas. Now observe the presence of these Himalayas. These Himalayas in the northwestern part, they are much wider, isn't it? They are very broad in the western part. Here, if you observe them, they are very wide. But observe these Himalayas in the east. They are very narrow, significantly narrow. But here they are very wide. So that is why it is said that from the plains of West Bengal or the region of Arunachal, you will be able to see very high mountains of the Great Himalayas. But from the region of Punjab, for example, all that you will be able to see some Shivalik or at max the Himachal. But the Great Himalayas will be very far. It is a different matter altogether that we have some politicians in Punjab who said that during the COVID days we could see Mount Everest from the region of Punjab. But that political aspect and the political knowledge kept aside. I hope you don't gain that kind of a political knowledge. So basically, that is the situation of the distribution of the mountains. Now, here also you will observe that this width, this thickness, this span, that also is ever foretelling about the amount of compression that the regions have experienced. So here, as these various different mountains, they are very, very closely spaced to each other, you can say that here the amount of compression in the northeastern part is much more as compared to the western part. Now, this compression and the formation of fold also extends across the eastern borders. And you also have the formation of the eastern Himalayas. Now, if you observe the axis of the mountains, in general, the axis has been like this. But there is a change in the different mountains that you find, for example, Suleiman, Kirthar, Hindu Kush, etc. They observe a different axis. They will observe an axis like this. Here also the eastern Himalayas, they observe an axis like this. So whenever the axis of the mountain, axis means the direction of alignment or the orientation, wherever they suddenly change, that is what is regarded as the syntaxial bend. That is what is the syntaxial bend. So what is this syntaxial bend? The change in the axis or direction of alignment alignment of the mountains. So Himalayas, they have two syntactial bends. When we talk about Himalayas, they have two syntactial bends. One in the west here, you have Nanga Parbat in the west, and then you have Namcha Parva in the east. So this is where you have the location of Namcha Parva. Again, you can locate it on the atlas, on the map. You can locate it here. It's the Namcha Parva. Okay. So that is the property of the Himalayas. With greater amount of convergence and compression, the width of the Himalayas is ever so decreasing and is declining. So when we talk about the Himalayas, they consist of the Himalayas and the northeastern hills, and they consist of a series of parallel mountain ranges. The general orientation is from northwest to southeast, and here the length of the Great Himalayan Range is around 2,500 kilometers from east to west, and the width varies between around 160 to 400 kilometers between the Great Himalayas and the Outer Himalayas. What is Pamir Knot? So, a knot, the name here, knot, basically is referred to as a point where multiple ranges appear to originate from. It is not the real origin of the mountain ranges, but if you stand at that area, you will observe mountain ranges converging in that region or meeting in that region. That is where the term knot is used. Pamir in the local Tajik language refers to basically the roof of the world. So here, that is basically Pamir Knot is referred to as the roof of the world, because if you stand, it is said that if you stand on that Pamir Knot, all around yourself in all the directions, all that you will be able to visit or you will be able to see is multiple ranges moving in different directions. So it appears as if these ranges are originating from that place. Hence the name Pamir Knot is given. Okay. Now, this is the cross section of the region of Himalayas. Now here, if you observe the greater or the inner Himalayas, the Himadri, middle or lesser Himalayas, Shivalik or outer Himalayas, and the Indo-Gangetic plain. But in between them, you see the MCT, the MBT, and the HFF. What are these? These are what are known as the thrust faults. This is what is known as the main central thrust. Central thrust. MBT is what is known as main boundary thrust. And HFF is what is known as Himalayan frontal fault. These are basically, all of these are faults or cracks which have opened up on the surface. So, the Himalayan frontal fault, the main boundary thrust, and the main central thrust. What are these? So, here, if you will observe the thrust faults in general, how are the thrust faults created? So, basically, these are formed as a result of folding, first of all, of folding. The process of folding leads to the formation of a thrust fault. How? So, as the rocks get folded, they reach their deformation limit. And as they reach their deformation limit, folding beyond that or compression beyond that leads to development of faults. So basically, here, let's suppose the convergence has led to the formation of the Great Himalayas. Now, as the process of convergence and as the process of compression would continue, eventually what would happen? There would be a limit to which this region could get deformed. Beyond that, this region wouldn't get deformed. It would rather crack or break. So as beyond this limit, if you carry out the process of deformation, you would observe that a crack would develop and the earlier mountain system at the base of it or in between that, a crack or a fault would develop. Now, as then again the compression would happen, while the earlier mountain system's height would increase, there would be movement across this fault line. And that movement across the fault line would yield very heavy earthquakes. But a continued motion across these would then eventually lead to the formation of the second range and the third range thereby, where the earlier range would be tall enough and another fault would develop here. Again, the formation of shivaliks would happen. Okay, so like that, you would have the formation of these thrust faults. So these thrust faults, if the convergence, etc., is still continuing, right? If let's suppose the compression is still continuing, the compression of the plates is still continuing, there will be movement across these thrust faults. And that is what induces very heavy earthquakes. So most of the earthquakes that you witness, the heavy earthquakes that you witness in the Himalayan region is experienced nowadays across the MBT. For example, the Kathmandu earthquake was due to the movement across MBT, or majority of the earthquakes that you observe in the region of Assam, in the region to the north of Delhi, etc., that is across the Himalayan frontal fault. Now, this main central thrust is not that actively moving anymore. These two are moving very actively. So that is why the regions of the Himalayas, they are so very active seismically. You have so frequent occurrence of earthquakes because of the fact that they lie, or the thrust faults, they indicate a slightest of the movement shaking up the ground surface in the entirety of the region. Now, out of all of these, the Great Himalayas, they form the earliest, so they will be the tallest and the narrowest as well due to the compression. And the latest one to be formed is the Shivaliks, which are largely a consequence of the deposits carried out by the rivers which would originate from the greater Himalayas, and eventually those deposits would have been folded to form the Shivaliks. But here, what is the interesting fact to note is that beyond the Shivaliks, in the region of the Indian plains, you have the development of another thrust fault, the Himalayan frontal fault, which tells you that going ahead into the future, there is definitely going to be a fourth range of the Himalayas, which is going to come up in that area. Okay. Now, almost all the mountain ranges of the area, you will observe, at least in the Himalayas, because it is the Indian plate which is pushing it forward, has got a distinct topography where the southern slope is very steep and the northern slope is a bit gentle. This is a distinct topography because it is being pushed from the Indian side. This kind of a topography is what is known as hogback topography. That is what is known as hogback topography. where you have a an asymmetrical kind of a slope, steep southern slope, and a gentle northern slope. So the northernmost range is known as the Great or the Inner Himalayas, or simply the Himadri. Now it is the most continuous range, consisting of the loftiest peaks with an average height of 6,000 meters. So think about it. Average height is 6,000 meters. Many of the continents, the tallest mountain peak is around 6,000 meters. Right? Here you have multiple ranges beyond 7 kilometers, 8 kilometers in height. Everest, Kanchenjunga, Makalu, Dholagiri, Nanga Parbat, Annapurna, Nanda Devi, Kamet, Namcha Barwa, all of them observe their height. This would basically have the largest concentration of tallest peaks anywhere across the world. Nowhere across the world do you have such lofty peaks in existence. Now, to the south of the Himadri or the Great Himalayas lies the Middle Himalayas or the Himachal. Now, these Himachal ranges consist of beautiful picturesque valleys like Dalhousie, Lansdowne, Dharamshala, then Mussoorie, all of them, they lie here. They are named differently in different areas. In the region of, for example, the Jammu Kashmir region, it is also known by the Pir Panjal. In the region of Himachal, known by Dhauladhar. Then you have the naming as Mahabharat Lake, Lipu Lake, etc. So here, the range line to the south of the Himadri forms the most rugged mountain system, and they are mainly composed of highly compressed and altered rocks. The altitude varies between 3,700 and 4,500 meters on an average, and its width is around 50 kilometers. It is known by different names. So, Pir Panjal, Dhauladhar, Mahabharat Range, and the various important and famous valleys are also present here. We study a lot about Hindu Kush. Where do you study a lot about Hindu Kush? Unless and until you are studying about the advent of Babur into India, that is where in history you study about Hindu Kush. Otherwise, Hindu Kush is okay, it is in discussion in a lot of social media also. This is Hindu Kush. These are the Hindu Kush ranges. It has got no relation with the existence of these Himalayas. These Hindu Kush ranges basically these were the when the Uzbeks were trying to come to India, and the Afghans, whenever they would try to come to India, these Hindu Kush ranges was something that they could not pass. And the mountain passes in these Hindu Kush ranges would kill a lot of them. So that is where these Hindu Kush ranges they provided as a barrier against the invading Huns, some of the Mongols, but most of the Mongols were deterred by not only the Hindu Kush but the Himalayas as well. Otherwise, you had the prowess, Kublai Khan, Attila the Hun. These were the people who had the prowess to move through. But for these Himalayan ranges and also Hindu Kush in the case of the Western invaders, it provided a kind of border. But Hindu Kush most prominently comes when you discuss about the uh, time of Shaibani Khan, the time of Babur, and the other Uzbeks who tried to come in. So basically, the famous story goes that eventually, on one fine evening, randomly Babur found in his close to his camp a young shepherd, a very young boy as a shepherd, and that shepherd basically was very instrumental in helping Babur and his entire caravan help them cross the region of Hindu Kush. Otherwise, the cold, snowy passes there historically had claimed many of the lives. So that is where. Any place else in history that you study Hindu Kush? Even I am curious about that. Basically, Hindu Kush is not very relevant even for your history syllabus. But any doubts that you have about that? Indo-Greek. Okay. Yeah, that's what. So the northwestern invaders, that is where you study about Hindu Kush. But if ever you get an opportunity to study about the Mughals, you have a very famous book series by Alex Rutherford. You can study that. There, Hindu Kush, in the story of Babur, it is described very beautifully because in his own autobiography, Tuzuki Baburi, Babur had described in significant detail about his travels across Hindu Kush. So that is where it is in detail uh, study a lot. But nonetheless, let's not divert our attention from geography to history. Also, sir, how was the Hindu Kush created? As you said, it is different from the Himalayas. Process of folding. Why I say different from Himalayas? Because the series of folding, it did not all happen at once. It happened in various different stages. So this region got folded separately. Okay. Now here, when we talk about the Himachal and the Himadri, so you have to understand that their formation was basically interspersed with a time duration of millions of years. So you basically had the Himalayas or the Himadri, which were formed almost 20 million years later. You had the formation of the region of Himachal, almost 20 million years later. Now, basically, you had a series of rivers, rivulets, streams, etc., which would drain from here. Now, they would carry out their deposits in this area. Almost 20 to 30 million years later, even this region got folded into the newest mountain range, that is the Shivaliks. So Shivaliks represent the outermost range of the Himalayas. Just like the Himachal, they are named differently in different areas. Jammu Hills in the northwest, and then Dafla, Miri, Mishmi, Abor in the region of Arunachal. They have different names. So Shivaliks are almost continuous from the region of northwest to northeast, other than the region between River Kali and then also River Tista and River Raidak. So around the region of River Kali in the area around northwestern part, that is where this is discontinuous. And in the eastern part between River Tista and River Raidak, that is where the Shivaliks are discontinuous. Otherwise, they are a continuous range. They are composed of unconsolidated sediments brought down by rivers from the main Himalayan ranges located further north. Okay, so the sediments which had been brought by the older rivers of the Himalayan system, which would have originated from the Great Himalayas and the Middle Himalayas. Now they are named as Jammu Hills in Jammu, Dang Range and Dundwa Range in Uttarakhand, Churya Ghat Hills of Nepal, Dafla, Miri, Abor, and Mishmi in the region of Arunachal Pradesh. Now here, basically, we come across few of the landforms which get created. We start with the dooms and duars. Okay, so when we talk about the dooms and duars, let me straight away tell you that these are the same landforms, different names for the same landform. The same landform, when it is formed in the eastern part of the Himalayas, it is known as a duar. When the same landform is formed in the western part of the Himalayas, it is known as dunes. So, depositional landform. Landform created in eastern and western Himalayas. In western Himalayas, it is known as dunes. In eastern Himalayas, it is known as duars. So, how are they created? So, let us understand that. So, the process of folding is a slow process. And when you have the process of folding, it is not as if the entire landmass in itself will get folded like a piece of paper. You might have few areas which get folded into small isolated hills or peak-like features. That might be present. So let's suppose you have a fold in the form of the Middle Himalayas or the Himachal. Now let's assume from this region you have a very small stream, because if the larger rivers would be flowing through this area, they would have eroded even any folding which would have happened in their path. So let's suppose you have a small stream which is flowing, and if there is a folding which happens in front of them, then what? If there is a folding which happens, let's suppose, in front of them, then the pathway of this river movement will be blocked. The pathway of this river movement would then basically be blocked, and this will have the accumulation of water. Now, whenever you have this accumulation of water from the rivers or the streams, they will have their own unique deposits, isn't it? They will have their own unique deposits of sediments. Now, eventually, these sedimentary deposits would be so significant enough, they would also elevate the level of water ever so slightly. They would basically elevate the level of water ever so slightly. And understand, this is a mountain. So imagine this, if the water is up till this level, it can be blocked by the mountain. But as the water level goes higher up, you have a conical mountain. So the water starts flowing from the sides. So eventually, after attaining a height, the water did exit from the sides. And what the water left behind was these deposits. These deposits in the valley-like shapes and in the valley-like region. So these are deposits left behind by the accumulated water of the trapped river. Eventually, the water would exit, leaving behind these deposits. And these deposits, they are known as dunes in the Western Himalayas and duars in the Eastern Himalayas. These are fertile. So if ever you have been to Dehradun, for example, Dehradun is an example of a dune. If ever you have been to Dehradun, for example, you stand there and you observe the region around. Dehradun appears to be a flattish region, but all around it you will observe mountains because it is that deposit. Right? So Dehradun, Kotli Dun, Patli Dun, these are some of the example of the dunes. Okay? This is a part of Shivalik. No, this is not a part of the Shivalik. Okay? So that is the case of these dunes. Right? Dehradun appears slanting. It will. The deposits need not always appear to be absolutely flattish. Trans Himalayas and Himadri both are northern in Himalayas. Trans Himalayas are to the north of the Himadri as well. Okay. So we'll do one thing. We'll restrict the session till here today. We'll proceed with the rest from Monday. Till that point of time, be very acclimatized to the map pointing of the regions that we have discussed today. I hope today's session has been helpful and meaningful to you guys. Till we meet again on Monday, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you. Sir, written on Shivalik's dune. Where? Longitudinal valley lying between Lesser Himalayas and the Shivaliks. Between them. Between the Himalayas and the Shivaliks. Okay? That is what is. So we'll meet again on Monday. Do take care of yourself. Happy Sankranti, happy Lodi, happy Bihu to all of you. And also happy Pongal. Goodbye. Thank you.